He was very much involved in all of the social, well, in fact, we had a staff member who was to deal with these social issues and have helped us in thinking them through. And I had children. I had one who was in his first year in college, and the five, the youngest one was in kindergarten. And so we had Downey was important to our family, as children and as youth, all the way through. And for instance, when Marianne was in high school, how haven't you? I mean, the high schools here were having problems with fights after the games, and so Downey Avenue had a sock hop every Friday night after when at the time they could get there, to give them something practical and to do rather than fight on Friday nights. And it was there that Marianne met her future and current husband. So we had Downey was very important to our family in many ways.
Yeah. Cool.
Now, is that
yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Sue. And we'll come back. Each person will have an opportunity to share, and then we'll ask some questions and share some specific memories if you have one you'd like to share and things of that nature. So we'll move on now to Linda. Linda, just introduce yourself and give a little bit of an intro.
Okay, my name is Linda Glover, and I've been a member of Downey since the mid-70s. When we first came to Indianapolis in '69, we belonged to Central because we had a really, really good friend who was the pastor down there. But when our kids got to teenagers, everybody in the neighborhood and their school and their friends all went to Downey. So we joined Downey not only because of the youth group, which they had a Friday morning breakfast club, which was attended by half the kids at Howe, certainly the neighborhood, and it was a huge success. And they would get up, at the crack of dawn to get to the breakfast club. And then the other thing that we enjoyed so much when we belonged to Downey was the Open Circle. And Open Circle was a group that met right after church, regular church, and we met for a meal. It was just a pitch in, and there was a worship service, very informal. The McCraes, Ian and Cynthia McCrae, were the leaders of that, and the pastors were part of it, and we had worship, and communion was dinner. And we had retreats. We had probably, I don't know, you guys, 75 to 100 people sometimes there. Because there were some people that came there that didn't come to regular church. And so it was active for about 10 years. And, but anyway, it was a great group, and we really enjoyed it. And that we lived just around the corner from Downey, so whenever the church was open, we usually were there. And Bob worked at Missions Building, and so we were very active at Downey. We did some of the youth programs, and the youth group went to Jamaica one year when Nell was in high school, I think a senior. And there was just a lot going on, both youth-wise and in the congregation. But I think my most favorite thing that I'm so proud of Downey was when we became open and affirming. And that was in, oh goodness, I can't even remember now when that was, about 10 years ago. Anyway, at least that long.
Not quite.
And there was only one person that we lost during that. Everybody else was all for it. And
Right.
that's just one of my proudest moments of Downey.
Yeah, for sure, and a very big deal.
Brody touched me.
Excuse me, Brody touched Bellamy apparently.
It doesn't taste good. It's pepper.
So, Stephen, will you go ahead and just intro yourself next and give, your big picture overview, and then we'll move to Jennie Beth, and then we'll share a little bit more specifics.
Of course. So when I first started attending Downey, I did not have much choice in the matter. I was about 6 days old.
Yes, I remember those days.
I can't guarantee that I had perfect attendance all the way through, but I do know there was a little, rosebud on the communion table when I was 6 days old, and remained pretty steady throughout the years, such that I'm just happy to say that I have connections with so many people. I took care of Sue and Walter's dogs when I was young, and when they were on vacation. They lived only about a block and a half away from me, so that was easy. I happened to be a 5th grade student in Jennie Beth Barnard's class at School 78.
Yep, very proud
and
of
the relationship there just blossomed and has continued. And Linda, I've known her and Bob my whole life. They've been influential in my life. Grew up with just a couple of years older than their youngest son. And played in the front yard with him and all good stuff. So, but I could have stories about just so many people. And that's what church family is about, So from the 2- and 3-year-olds class, which was called the Johnson's room, or the Johnson's class, to being an early member of the Downey Co-op preschool.
Why was it called the Johnson's class?
Because it was Harold and Ruth Johnson, who were the founding teachers, I'm sure. Just stalwarts,
They're about 30 years.
30 years.
It was about 30 years. They worked with the 2- and 3-year-olds. Yep.
Yeah.
Just a darling couple, honestly.
Yep.
And I returned to that class as a high schooler and got to help to, kind of be a junior teacher. And then I guess it was about 16 years ago, we moved to Brownsburg, and we took about a 12 or 13 year hiatus. And we had a good experience at a Lutheran church up in Zionsville. But then a few years ago, we started church shopping again, and kind of decided that our friend group at Downey was still so very solid. We didn't need to go to a different church to rebuild. Instead, we decided to come back to Downey, and I have to say, with all the stories that I can tell, and which I'll have a few to share today, I'm thrilled to be back at Downey for a brand new experience. It is in part the same church, and in many ways, not at all the same church, but wonderful, and has reinvented itself. And so as much as today is about history and old stories, Downey is alive and well, and moving ahead, moving forward. So that's my story in a nutshell.
Great.
Wonderful.
We're glad to have you back too.
Yes. And Jennie Beth, we'll let you just kind of give your intro and
Okay.
just kind of share a little bit, and then We'll ask.
I think I go back a little bit earlier than than the others. Moved to Indianapolis and became a part of Downey in the fall of 1944.
Wow.
So that was back, excuse me, in the days of the old building. And I think some of the newer people might like to know a bit about that. The former sanctuary was what they call the Akron style, where the pews were arranged in a semicircle in the sanctuary, and the choir sat behind the pulpit where the minister was. I was asking my siblings about their memories, and my brother remembered how our dad, who was in the choir, would fall asleep during worship and sitting there in the choir. But that was a very different time because that building was different. There was actually a basketball court on one floor of the building. It was very, very popular. So even at that time, it was had a very strong youth group. At that time, their very active national program was Christian Youth Fellowship, and we were part of that. But there was also a United Christian Youth Movement we were part of, that interdenominational group. I would like to pick up one thing that Sue mentioned about those older days, and that is about the role of women not being so possible until much later, and also changing, being women, being able to wear pants and some of the other styles and customs that have changed. But the new building was built in 1953. I don't remember exactly when the education unit was built, but it was shortly after that. And so things changed dramatically at that point. Again, the youth group has always been a very prominent part of the life of Downey. And at times it was huge. Mary Jo was reflecting as I talked with her that the youth group during her days, because she's 3 years younger, so she was there. I was only there as a youth for 2 years, and then was away and came back in 1967. So I sort of have two eras. Mary Jo was there a longer time, and she was remembering that we were very closely tied to Howe High School. There were quite a few people, students and adults. And one of the teachers at Howe was the youth teacher, and very popular. And sometimes she said the room was already almost bursting with youth, but then the whole basketball team from Howe would come for Sunday school. So that must have been, I didn't experience that, but she did. So these were some of those very early days back in the 40s and early 50s. And those are the main things I thought that would be informative to the new people. When we came back in the 60s, late 60s, one of the things that I remember rather vividly is sometimes there would be discussions of the budget, and some people would be saying, well, we need such and such a repair. We need these improvements made. And others would say, but no, we need to give at least 20 to 25% of our budget to foreign missions. We were very much acquainted with and blessed by frequent visits from missionaries who were coming to the national offices nearby and would come and visit Downey and speak. So there was a great interest in supporting missions. I don't recall a lot of outreach to the immediate community, but I felt there's always been a very strong interest in supporting our missionaries and all the mission work being done throughout the world. So I did want to mention that.
Oh, and the list, there is a list of all the missionaries in publication for a missions building.
Right.
Most of those were members at Downey. And so Downey had a very strong interest in and contribution to
Right.
missions.
Yes, awesome. I know that for those of you who aren't aware, when they're referencing the missions building, that's does everybody know what building they're referring to? So the building that they're referring to is just you know, I don't know, half a block down
Sort of south.
Downey Avenue, continuing south on Downey Avenue.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a big brick building. And right now it's apartments. It's a big apartment complex. But it used to be the mission building and the headquarters for the Disciples of Christ denomination. So a lot, what they're referring to is how many people who were headquartered there for Disciples of Christ all around the world who worked in that building, lived in the neighborhood, and went to Downey. So many people who were integral in the leadership of the whole denomination were a part of Downey. And so that's the mission building that they're talking about. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about that building is I was in it recently, and it's apartments, but a lot of the original labels and classroom names are still there outside of the apartment door. So there's one apartment like on the second floor or something that has on the outside of the apartment door, Department of Foreign Missions, or something like that. And so it's really neat, because if you walk through there, you see all the different offices as what they were back in the 1940s.
And Bob used to have the third floor corner office.
When you think about Downey's history, we can't think about it without considering missions building.
Right.
Because of just what you were saying, that the denominational leadership was there. They were members of Downey. Mm-hmm. And what made the biggest difference for Downey was when missions building moved away and moved downtown. And the leaders, and so that part of the membership was no longer living close by. And so when we think of Downey, that was one of the big changes, that it made a huge difference in Downey. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you, I thought, one thing I think about Downey is that it was always on the cutting edge. Mm-hmm. And the leadership in whatever the issue was, and it is still that way, and it has an intellectual and a cutting edge to it yet, and that's one thing that I like and appreciate through the years. Yeah, has been Downey. Oh, and you talked about women. Yes. And women were not elders. They might be deacons, but women were not elders. And finally, when Downey was moving to have a woman elder, and the first one was the vice president of the whole missionary society, and had been a missionary in Japan. And so when it came up and she was voted to be an elder at Downey, that was new. And one of the men I saw walking out down the aisle had tears in his eyes.
What kind of tears were those?
Yes, what kind?
Yeah, right. But as you mentioned the pants, because women always wore skirts in those days.
Right.
And always skirts to church. But when May Ward, when it was a 0 day in winter one time, May Ward came to church with pants on. And that was the first, and we all began to wear pants.
I never knew that. That's why the women's group's named after her, because she liberated all the women. Right?
Specifically that.
I never knew that. That's great.
May was a leader in many things.
Yes, she was in many ways. I did not remember that she was one that started that.
That's wonderful. That's great. I just want to say, Cassandra and Mary Jo, we're thrilled that you can join us in this conversation. If you want to join by video, you're welcome to. You certainly don't have to. And if you'd like to speak at any time, just unmute your microphones and you're welcome into that conversation. I'm sure Mary Jo has many stories and memories to share as well. Sorry about that. So
some of the children, the things they remember was that they were free to run in Downey. That they could run.
Right.
Well, my children are under that impression as well. So that has not changed one bit, because we were just there this morning and they were making themselves at home. So that continues to be a part of our culture.
Children do, right.
Yes. So I'm curious to know, Linda, you talked about the church becoming open and affirming, and that was one of your proudest moments. I'm curious to know, like, how that was received. Like, when that conversation started coming up in the church, how did that process work, and how did people respond to that? Was it a no-brainer? Was there tension around it? What was it like?
Well,
What was the issue? I didn't understand what the issue was. What was the question that you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm asking Linda or anyone else, when the church decided to begin having conversations about being an open and affirming congregation.
Oh, that's been a long process. It did not happen overnight. And there were times when the elders or the board had a period of study of the whole issue, from biblical to scientific to physical, to health, all of that kind of thing. And so it was not sudden. There was preparation for it over a period of time, so that we did not have a big half the congregation leave because they weren't ready to deal with it. Okay.
But when we finally got to the vote, there was hardly any, if any, dissension.
That was my feeling. Yes, it was a no-brainer, just about.
Right.
We were very much ready for that, and very enthused about taking that step.
Yeah, and we were all so delighted.
I appreciate what Stephen said about Downey as it's changed through the years, and it fits with what Sue was saying about being on the cutting edge, because whatever the issues are, the main issues are, Downey seems ready to be working on them, and it's very invigorating.
Well, I think that definitely in part because of you all, honestly. I know you even you mentioned leadership, and it's really lay leadership that drives that. I think that I think I've never been a part of a church community where the laity is so knowledgeable, so informed, so understanding of culture and what's happening in the world. And it's definitely in the DNA of the church. I think that's been my experience.
I hope so. It's important to keep that.
I think that it does come from a long standing tradition, and the leadership, back from the missions building time. So many of those leaders were ordained ministers. And can you imagine how intimidating that might be, to be the minister of this congregation where half the people in the pews are ordained.
Yeah.
But you bet there were wonderful conversations, great leadership, great Sunday school classes, you know. So yeah, absolutely. And again, it's not to take away from today, because as you said, Melody, I mean, it is in our DNA. It is still absolutely a part of the congregation today.
Yeah.
Stephen, I remember your parents is a part of that. Such fond memories, your parents and your sisters.
My parents led in relatively quiet ways.
But they led.
You know, my dad was a devout member of the choir. My mom was in the nursery every Sunday, and she counted offering after church every Sunday, you know. And, you know, they took their turn as deacons or elders, but never did they take a, you know, they were not the chair, they were not the moderator of the congregation or anything. I mean, neither one of them was comfortable speaking in front of the whole group, you know. My mom did work over at the missions building.
They were sure there.
Yes.
They were.
Yes.
Steve, I want to say they were the kind of dependable, you know, the supportive kind of people that you'd like to have a whole congregation of.
Sure, sure.
They were greatly appreciated.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know about the old building. So there's that picture outside of Century Hall with the old building. I'm curious to know, like, what was the process of building the new building? What happened to the old building? Was it torn down? I'm curious to know as much as anyone wants to share about it.
I was not in the congregation at that time, so I was gone. I think they tore it down completely. Both of my sisters got married that summer, and the building was not available because there was no building there. And so they were married in Irvington Presbyterian Church. So I think they tore the building clear down and just.
Am I right that there was a fire in the old red church, the original sanctuary building?
I'm not aware of that.
I thought that's what did it in.
Oh.
Was there a fire before the recent one?
I thought so. And then, Jenny Beth, did you say it was early 50s when the sanctuary was built?
It was, the new sanctuary was in process in 1953.
And then I think the education wing as we know it was built in, I think the early 60s. I think there's a cornerstone over on the Julian door.
That's right.
62
That's right.
maybe. But I came prepared for this part of the conversation.
Good. All right.
I did.
Yeah,
So,
lay it on us.
He's got the data.
I came prepared. So one thing is, there was a great artist among the congregation. His name was John Fulton. And he created so many wonderful banners. One of those banners read, "This church has been a rock in Irvington since 1875. And I imagine that's when the red sanctuary was built, or at least when the congregation was organized. And of course, there's that red church. The picture has been hanging in the hallway. I think it's still there. But I also remember going to Sunday school classes in the old education building. And I brought a piece of that along for this.
Wow.
It was an old yellow brick building, 3 stories tall. And I don't know how many classrooms were in that building, but there was room for a lot of classes.
It was big.
But there was room for the basketball court.
Right.
The ceiling high enough for it.
So it was about probably 73 or 74 when the decision was made to raise that. And it was 1975 then.
Not 73. It was much earlier than that.
To raise the building?
Had to be, because it was, the new one was being built in 73.
So Century Hall then was dedicated in 1975, thus its name, because the church started in 1875. And I want to just highlight the ideas specifically what Linda and Sue were talking about, that Downey has always been on the cutting edge.
Mm-hmm.
And Century Hall was cutting edge.
Mhm.
The idea of bringing the fellowship hall up out of the basement, which is it was the most typical place for a fellowship hall. It's the same as over at the Presbyterian Church and the Methodist Church within Irvington.
Yep.
That's just the way it was. Well, so we built Century Hall. Now the fellowship hall was on the main floor,
Right.
no steps, easy access.
Right.
And I think in that regard, Downey exhibited the fact that it was on, forward thinking.
That's
It's
a
on
good
the cutting
point.
edge.
Right.
And I have great memories of Century Hall with fellowship pitch-in dinners,
Yes.
with tables down both hallways that
Mhm.
line the courtyard,
Yep.
and those brand new round tables, with red and green and yellow chairs.
Yep.
Volleyball every
Yeah.
Sunday afternoon with a crew of about maybe at least a dozen, and sometimes as many as 20. And of course, madrigal dinners
Oh, yeah.
put on by Howe High School madrigal singers,
Right.
but dinners put together sometimes by Walt Knorr, Sue's
Oh, yes.
husband.
That's one.
And anyway, what a wonderful hall to
Yes.
host great events. And of course, it continues to serve us well.
The interesting thing is that when Open Circle started, though, it went to the basement
Hmm.
and it met down there.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it was larger space. It really wasn't, but I don't know, for some reason, that's where it ended up, was in the basement.
Mhm.
I have good memories of fellowship dinners downstairs as well.
Right.
Oh, yes,
But-
absolutely.
Anyway, that's my brick story.
Yeah.
That's really neat. And I had no idea why it was called Century Hall. So that's really neat to learn
There you
that.
go.
But
Right.
it's
Yeah.
the century, because of the century mark. That's cool. So the yellow brick building was where Century Hall is now.
Yes. If you go down underneath the kitchen, there's a boiler room.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see doors that used to go into the basement level of that old building. But yeah, it stretched all the way from sort of those stairs there, right outside the narthex, all the way over to the preschool room.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting. That's great.
I didn't know those doors were there. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's just
Another
remnant.
memory was in the days when the Vacation Church School was a big deal in the summer. We had some huge events, even built around musicals.
Mhm.
Christine McNally and I helped lead several of those, and they were really big events.
And lots of kids.
I was going to share the same notion, Jenny Beth. I
Okay.
remember vividly Sam, the story of the Good Samaritan,
Yes.
the story of Daniel in the lion's den, along with Shadrach, Meshach, and
There you
Abednego.
go.
That was called "It's Cool in the Furnace."
Uh-huh. You remember the title.
And then, of course,
It was fun.
Joseph.
Yes, it was
Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. And I absolutely remember you and Christine teaching us all 50 some colors in that song.
almost right. Yep.
I remember Stephen was in that, and he loved that, standing out there in that multicolored coat.
I was a young Joseph. I think Mark Stewart was the
was
more
he?
mature, the older Joseph.
Ah,
The building that now is owned by the Mundells, did that used to be a part of Downey or the denominations? Has it always
Denomination.
been
Denomination.
the denomination? Okay.
The Board of Church Extension.
Oh, okay.
It was the savings and lending branch of
Mhm.
the Disciples of Christ.
Of the disciples, right.
Okay.
Ministers would have their retirement savings there. Churches would borrow for renovations or for new buildings. And they would offer architectural and consulting services. The organization,
the Board of Church Extension still does that.
it still exists.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And they moved downtown when all of the other offices went downtown.
But that building, the round building across from Downey, was built for those offices when it was first built.
Okay. That's
Downey
great.
does still own a spot of land on the other, back behind that building.
I think of,
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. That's another of my memories is I used to mow the lawn,
Oh,
wow.
both around the church and that other little spot.
That is
We used to have picnics and everything back there, I remember.
yeah, that's something that Trey and I have been talking a lot about. What can we do with that space? And so we're starting to turn our attention to that space and see if we can bring it alive in some way.
right.
So we can utilize all the space we've
Most of
got.
us are not aware of that.
Yeah. So what else? What I'm particularly interested in situations or the way the church responded during the civil rights movement of the 60s and other sort of really pertinent and prominent times in our country's history, specifically around social justice and how the church responded, and any specific memories that any of y'all have about that.
I don't remember anything from
The missions building, and they belong to Downey also, was, now I'm blocking on his name. They had a special department in missions building for social issues and to work on justice and social issues. And that was a big part of what they saw as their mission. Rollins Fowle was the head of that for a while. And
there were a lot of people that were really involved in the civil rights movement in the early to mid 70s. And Garnet Day and
Garnet.
Cunningham.
Ian McRae.
And Bob,
Ian McRae, yes.
they spent a couple of nights in our basement because they were to be arrested. And so we put them up in our basement so they couldn't find us.
Ah,
And so they were very, very active in Garnet particularly. But all that crowd was really active in the civil rights movement.
Anybody else have any questions for our panelists, I guess, our storytellers, our historians? Anything that you'd like to know about Downey's history, or just questions you might have?
I think there's a book of Downey history up to
Yes, there
75, is it? 100 years?
mm.
And there's so much that's happened since then. It's a shame that somebody doesn't get the rest of that down.
Mm.
We have 5 more years to write the story of the next 50.
That's
Good.
true.
Let's get
We can do
started.
that. That'd be
Yes.
great.
Right,
A second installment.
really.
Yeah.
I'm
We've
sure
done
that you've seen that huge album of pictures that go back to, I'm not sure how far. Have you seen them?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, there's in the disciple room, I think it is the room that is across from, right next to my office, across from Trey's office, that classroom there's a huge book, and I mean it's huge. It's very large. It's bound by it's got wood covers on the front and the back, and it's bound by leather and stuff. But it's an amazing book. If you ever have a few minutes, just hop in that classroom and take a peek through that, because you'll see pictures of Stephen Ince when he was 6 days old, and all the other folks on this call, and so many other people, and just see some great information about the history of the church. And we also have that book, A Century of Witness, which is the book of the first 100 years of Downey from 1875 to 1975. And we have copies of that people are welcome to take with them and read. And there's some really fascinating stories there. There's a handful of really great stories about Sue Cardwell in that book. And her...
Oh, I'll have to.
Yeah.
I have a copy of it. I'll have to.
You'll have to get it out and check and see if it's accurate. But yeah, there's some great stories about Sue's missionary work and things like that. So if anybody wants one of those books, we have a stack, a couple of boxes of them in the office, and those are really great too. But
evidently we printed plenty.
we printed plenty, but they go. People ask for them a good bit. So when we do like our Downey 101s, sometimes people ask about that, and want to check it out and see what it says.
Right.
There's another aspect of Downey's history that I wanted to highlight at least a little bit, and it has a lot to do with race relations. When I was about first and second grade, I believe, Stottrell Lowe was our associate minister.
Right.
He must have been either a seminary student or a recent graduate. But an interesting bit of that is...
He was studying at CTS. Okay.
Yeah. Stottrell happened to be from Kingston, Jamaica, where he still lives. I think he's still there. I have contact with his son Garfield and his daughter Wendy, just a little bit, but still. Anyway, a very beautiful, dark-skinned black man. His whole family, his wife and 2 children. No, excuse me, 3 children. They had a younger boy. They lived around the corner on University, and it was just a wonderful time within Downey's history to have a black man as in the leadership position.
Yes.
Somewhere along in that same time frame, I think it was probably one of Downey's first sponsorships of refugees. And now you all can correct me if I'm wrong, but the DeHert family, were they a refugee family, and were they one of the first to be sponsored?
Oh my.
I was not involved in that. I do not know.
I know the families, but
I don't know that tidbit for sure, but I will say this. Along in the early 80s, the first family that I was very much involved with was the Au family. That's AU. They're Vietnamese family. I was best friends with their son, Duck, who now lives in Orange, California. Goes by David. He showed me in the National Geographic the exact path that their little boat took from Vietnam to the coast of California. And our church helped to find them an apartment, to find furniture, to find work. He and I delivered newspapers together every morning. We'd walk over and pick up the newspapers and walk back and deliver them. We played soccer together in high school, and I had a very good relationship with their whole family. And that sponsorship of refugees continued for many, many years, actually.
Wasn't there a couple from Croatia?
The Dragic family, Ned and can't think of her name. Ned Dragic. Yeah, he was like, one of them was Bosnian and one was Serbian, and you don't mix.
That's right.
And actually, he was Catholic and she was Protestant. You don't mix. So yeah, they were political refugees for those reasons.
Right.
And then there was a
And
Polish
they had
family,
a
the
little- they had a little
Zarowski
trouble
family.
Getting along, didn't they?
Pardon?
Didn't they have a few problems marital-wise getting along?
Oh, everybody does, right?
Yeah. But it was funny to know that that was what the situation was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
But so, yeah, we sponsored the Zarowski family.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Stephanie taught Agatha in pharmacy school at Butler
Oh,
some years later.
Oh, really?
And so anyway, the list goes on, but I just wanted to highlight that as a wonderful part
Very
of
important
Downey's
yes.
involvement in the community, in the world community,
Mm-hmm.
and in
I'm glad you
Irvington
remembered
community at the
that.
same time.
Yeah, that was, I think, a very important, one of Downey's important ministries.
Mhm. Another wonderful project was called the Christmas, is it just called the Christmas Project?
Oh, yeah.
And the McNellys really
Yes.
led the charge on that, but it was absolutely a church-wide effort. And we'd take 25 to maybe 50
Yeah.
families per year and shower them with gifts and with household items.
Mm-hmm.
And food.
Great
Yeah.
project.
Yeah. And that went on for years. I
Mhm.
don't remember how many, but 10 or 15 maybe? 10 anyway. This is great. This is like old home week. I've forgotten some of these things.
I'm curious to know about the number of folks that have been participants at Downey. Like during your or from your memory, like what's like the largest regular membership, the largest and the smallest, and anywhere in between? Like where's that kind of been? How have you seen that fluctuate?
But now, when we moved here, there were 1,200 members at Downey.
Wow.
You heard that?
Yeah.
Wow.
There were 1,200
It was a
members
very large
at
congregation.
Downey in
Yep.
1958.
Mm-hmm.
That's in our current building?
What?
In
Yeah.
our current
Yes.
building?
Yes.
Yeah.
There
In-
were
There were probably 800 when we moved there. I don't think there were 1,200, but between 800 and 1,000.
In
there
our
were definitely
current sanctuary?
two services for sure,
service,
Um,
right.
up until maybe the mid to late 60s. Does that sound about right?
I'm not sure. I'm not that good on dates, but there were two until, yeah.
The highest number of members I remember is 475. And just like always, about half that many people were in church on any given
Right.
Sunday.
Attending, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, one thing, when they had the 1,200, they took 100 and started Eastgate Church.
Oh,
Yes, Eastgate Christian Church was started. Quite a few members from Downey Avenue. That's where my first husband, Herbert, was the first pastor. And they were members of Downey plus other East Side churches that agreed to be a part of that new congregation. I'd forgotten that there were 100 of them. That's significant.
Where was this? When was
Well,
this?
that's the number. They say you take 100 people and you've started a congregation. You know, if you have 25, I couldn't get very far.
When was that they moved? Was it Speedway, you said?
Eastgate.
Oh, Eastgate. That's
Christian
right.
Church.
That's right.
Out
Eastgate.
there on 16th Street.
And when was that? Do you remember?
Yes, 1957.
67 or 57?
57, yep.
Okay, that was before we came here. I remember them telling us that they had, but
Yes,
it was before we were here.
that's when it was a brand new congregation. Yep,
Jennie, Beth,
yes.
where did you grow up? Where was your childhood home?
Several places. Born in Texas.
Is there a common home within among the speakers here?
Yes, indeed.
I doubt it. I was born in Texas, then was in Connecticut, in Georgia, and Virginia, and St. Louis, and then Indianapolis.
Where did your parents live when you were younger? In Indianapolis? Or maybe it was when you moved away.
357 South Downey is where we lived in Indianapolis.
Linda, what was your address?
357 South Downey.
Did you already know that, Steve?
I knew that.
Yeah.
When we moved here,
Right.
the Taylors were retiring. Bob took his job.
Yep.
And then when they moved, I forgot now wherever, St. Louis, wherever it was they moved to, they weren't
Columbia,
positive.
Missouri. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They weren't real sure they wanted to get rid of the house. So we lived for the first 6 months or so in the big house behind the funeral home there on Irving.
Oh, yeah.
And then they decided, they came back about Thanksgiving and said, no, we're going to stay. You can have the house. So we moved over there and lived there for the next 40 years.
Yes, you
It was
did.
great.
Longer than they did. Mm-hmm.
In fact, the house belonged, it was built in, the late 80s or the early 1900s. And every family that lived there were disciples.
Mm-hmm.
The people that built it and then the people
All the
after that.
occupants. Yeah.
Jenny raised a great question in the chat, Jenny Morris. She says, I know the Disciples denomination, like others, have churches on a spectrum from more conservative to more progressive beliefs. I'm curious about the ability for different disciples churches to make decisions for themselves on things like being open and affirming. Speaking from the lens of a cradle Catholic, where churches are tied to an archdiocese without the ability to make many autonomous decisions like that. Does that type of structure exist in the disciples' faith?
Now, wait a minute. First, you have to go back to where the whole division from the independent churches and the, where all the denominations broke up with an independent and or a fundamentalist and a more progressive part. And the disciples did the same thing. We have the independent churches and we have the disciple churches. So, the Southern Baptists, the Lutherans, you name them, they all split along that line along about the same time. In the it was happening in the 30s and 40s, and
No, later.
what?
I think you all know as much as I about this, but I believe the disciples have, individual congregations have the option.
Mm-hmm.
But it was,
We do not have an overall structure that says you must be this or must be that.
Yeah, somehow
the whole Christian church denomination had a congregational decision-making ethos. Anyhow, you called your own pastor for whoever you wanted. You supported whatever mission you wanted. And if you had a couple that came, it could be the missionary society or it could be an independent couple. So that whole matter of cooperative or independent, I remember those days, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is she trying to, team viewer, yeah, okay.
Melody, is the topic of the history of the denomination on for next week?
Yes, so that's a great segue to that.
Yes, it is.
So next week we're going to be joined by special guest Reverend Dick Hamm. Dick is a former general minister and president of the denomination, so like the Pope of the Disciples of Christ. Right. And so he's
without the hat.
Without
without the hat, right?
Dick, Hamm, and who else?
What's that?
Dick, Hamm, and who else?
So Dick is going to be our special guest next week, just Dick, and he's going to share with us the history of the denomination of what's called the Stone Campbell movement.
Right.
Right.
And so that's named after Barton Stone and Alexander Campbell, who are the founders of the movement that is now the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. So so he'll be with us to share all sorts of really great historical information and some really great stories about how things happen. And then the following week after that, we're going to be joined by Dr. Scott C., who's a professor at Christian Theological Seminary.
Dr. who?
Dr. Scott C.
Oh, Scott C., yes.
Yeah, and he's going to share with us about the history of Black disciples. So there's really two different groups within the Stone Campbell movement. There's the white group, and then there's the Black group. And in terms of how those two groups moved at the same time, sort of parallel to one another, but not necessarily integrated and together. Right. So Scott's going to share with us about the experience of Black disciples. And then the week after that, Carrie Armstrong is, he's a member of Central Christian Church downtown. And he's one of the original participants in the GLAD Alliance, the LGBT affirming ministry of disciples. And he was there sort of on the front lines years ago, working with people like Bob to even create a ministry like that, where churches could be open and affirming. Mm-hmm. And so he's going to share with us some history on the movement to make that a recognized ministry and to get some acceptance as a queer person in the denomination itself. So lots of really great information as the disciples community.
That would be great.
So
well, now is that at this time and this kind of meeting?
This time, this link, it'll all be the same. Yes. So yeah, so all the same information, and we'll just have a couple of special guest speakers, and we can ask them whatever we want. There's going to be some really great information shared. It's really amazing to hear some of the detail, congregational polity.
Yes, right.
Which is what we have, was revolutionary at the time. Each individual church got to decide for themselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, that wasn't the way things were done in religious traditions, the Christian traditions of the past. So it was really groundbreaking stuff to have a congregational polity where each church got to decide on their own what kind of church they wanted to be.
And yet there was this support group of the disciples behind it.
Yeah.
Well, now, will that be at this hour and
5 o'clock?
Yes, 5 o'clock for the next 3 Thursdays.
And you have to sign. I mean, we have to let you know ahead of time to expect us.
Nope, you don't. You don't have to at all. You can just show up, Sue.
I mean, just come and
just click on the link. Just click on the link, just like you did today.
Save that email so that you have the same link to click.
Oh, I have. It's the same.
Yeah.
Same
room.
Link.
That same link will work next week. Every week.
Every week. Okay.
Every week. Uh-huh.
Oh yeah. Right.
Well, so before we go, are there any other bits of information that you all want to share, or that somebody wants to ask about? Anything? I don't want to leave anything uncovered in this conversation.
You're muted, Linda. Say that again.
Is Linda, I'm not hearing. Linda?
We didn't hear your last comment, Linda. If you can unmute yourself.
Well, is she still there?
Well, we'll see if Linda could get that in the. But in the meantime,
Right.
thank you all for being here, for being a part of this conversation. I love hearing information. If y'all think of something that you didn't share and you want to share, let me know, because I want to know it. I want to learn about it. I want to
Okay.
All right.
more. So be sure to pass it along.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Have a good evening.
All right.
We'll see you soon.
Same to you.
And
All right. Good night.
I'm going to
Bye-bye.
be here next week and the week after.